This is Power Hour with Gabriella Power.
Hello and welcome to Power Hour. I'm Gabriella Power. Thank you for your company. Well, Joe Biden is back and he's as delusional as ever. The former president of the United States sat down for his first major interview since exiting the White House with BBC Radio 4. Now, enough time has passed. He's had plenty of time for naps and plenty of time to reflect. Now, the former president was asked if perhaps he left it too late to drop out of the race, leaving Kamala Harris just a few months to run a campaign. Because as we know, it was this time last year that Joe Biden was still adamant that he was the best person for the job and he was trying to convince you he was mentally fit to stay on as president, which even those on the left admit was BS. Well, according to Joe Biden, he has no regrets, none at all. And the reason he took so long to drop out of the race, well, it's because he was just so successful.
Should you have withdrawn earlier, given someone else a bigger chance?
I don't think it would have mattered. And become so successful on our agenda, it was hard to say, no, I'm going to stop now. Things moved so quickly that it made it difficult to walk away, it was a hard decision. But
regrets, though?
No, I think it was the right decision. I think that it was just a difficult decision.
I mean, even with the benefit of hindsight, he cannot bring himself to face reality and speak a bit of truth. There was every indication last year that most Americans felt the country was going in the wrong direction, not exactly the definition of success. So if anyone was wondering, it's clear that Joe Biden still has a hero complex and severe TDS. The 82-year-old dropped several bombshells throughout this interview, and he, of course, blasted Donald Trump for essentially attempting to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. He labelled the president foolish and claimed that Trump's fiery meeting with Zelensky was, quote, beneath America.
What did you make of those scenes in the Oval Office? President Trump and President Zelensky?
I found it sort of beneath America, the way that took place. And the way we talk about now that, it's just the Gulf of America. Maybe we're going to have to take back Panama. Maybe we need to acquire Greenland. Maybe Canada should be. What the hell's going on here? What president ever talks like that? That's not who we are. We're about freedom, democracy, opportunity, not about confiscation.
It seems Joe Biden doesn't like watching a president stand up for his country and a leader reminding the world he's putting America first. Joining us now is elections correspondent at The Federalist, Brianna Lyman. Brianna, great to see you again. Former US President Joe Biden has sat down for an interview with the BBC, and just as we witnessed time and time again last year, he showed up, but it's like he's barely there. He takes long pauses, he mumbles, he whispers. It's hard to really know what he's exactly saying, but he, of course, took the opportunity to rip right into Donald Trump, claiming that Trump hasn't achieved anything triumphant in his first 100 days.
What does President Biden say about Trump's first 100 days?
I'll let history judge that. I don't see anything that was triumphant.
And you see things to worry about. Do you, when you talk of a threat to democracy, worry about a threat to democracy here at home, here in the United States?
I'm less concerned about that than I was, because I think the Republican Party is waking up to what Trump is about.
Do you think they may fight back?
I think the beginning, yes.
Isn't it interesting, Brianna? All last year we heard from Joe Biden and the Democrats that Trump was a threat to democracy, and now it turns out that democracy hasn't ended and there are no signs that it is ending anytime soon with Donald Trump in power. But I want to get your reaction. What are your thoughts on this interview from Joe Biden?
Yeah, I think three main points. First of all, on the democracy, I have no idea what he's talking about when he says that Republicans are kind of like wisening up to it. Couldn't tell you what he's talking about. Second of all, no one is talking about this interview here the way that it probably would have been if this was, let's say, Obama reflecting in Donald Trump's first term, right? You would think there'd be more fanfare. It's not. Lastly, he says that there have been no accomplishments. And I've written about this. Donald Trump has done several things that are important. But the number one thing Donald Trump did, which, if it was his only accomplishment, would have been more than enough to sustain us for 4 years, is he shut down the southern border that Joe Biden left open. It was the Biden administration that used a forklift to open up the fences that Texas had, right? And Donald Trump shut it down completely. We have record low crossings across the border. We're not releasing people into the interior of the United States. So for Joe Biden to say that he's done nothing, either Joe Biden is trying to cover up for what he did for 4 years, or he legitimately is mentally ill and doesn't see what Donald Trump has done.
Well said. Well, let's talk about what is happening in the United States. There's been a breakthrough in the tariff standoff between the US and China. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and the US Trade Representative will meet with Chinese officials in Switzerland this weekend. Now, Scott Bessent says that the focus will be on de-escalation.
Well, I think that this is what we're going to do in Switzerland is we've agreed to talk. Then on Saturday and Sunday, we will agree what we're going to talk about. My sense is that this will be about de-escalation, not about the big trade deal.
While many countries received a 90-day reprieve for Liberation Day tariffs above the baseline rate of 10% last month, the US, of course, increased the overall penalty on Chinese goods to 145%. Beijing responded by raising tariffs on US goods to 125%. Now, Donald Trump was asked about the talks today. This is what he had to say.
We'll see. I mean, look, it's... We were losing $1 trillion a year. Now we're not losing anything, you know? That's the way I look at it. We were losing with China on trade $1 trillion a year. More, actually, 1.1. But let's say $1 trillion. You know what we're losing now? Nothing. That's not bad.
Plenty of people, of course, want to see a fair deal made. What can we expect from this first meeting?
Well, I think Scott Bessent has proven himself time and time again throughout his long career about the type of negotiator he is. And Donald Trump and Scott Bessent are both on the same page, and they're very clear. This is about leveling the playing field, because it's not that China just has, or, other countries don't have tariffs on us, we have tariffs on them, vice versa, however it works, right? It's that China engages in things like debt trap diplomacy, currency manipulation. They ship things to Mexico so that they can bypass tariffs because of the United States, Mexico-Canada agreement that Donald Trump got in his first term, right? So there's a lot of different things that we have to do right now over the next 4 years to level that playing field. There is a lot of talk domestically. Mike Pence said it, cheaper goods is part of the American dream. People are worried about these tariffs with China. At the end of the day, there is no cheap good that is worth the expense of losing all of our manufacturing and losing to China in this trade war. So I'm hopeful for these talks. I think that they're not going to back down. It's a game of chicken, and I think China will back down first.
Okay, we will wait and see. I suppose those talks have happened sooner than expected, some might say. But Donald Trump has also announced that the US will stop bombing the Houthi rebels in Yemen, claiming that essentially the Houthis have surrendered. And the president says that they just don't want to fight anymore.
We had some very good news last night. The Houthis have announced that they are not, or they've announced to us at least, that they don't want to fight anymore. They just don't want to fight. And we will honor that. And we will stop the bombings. And they have capitulated, but more importantly, we will take their word. They say they will not be blowing up ships anymore. And that's what the purpose of what we were doing. So that's just news. We just found out about that.
So as part of this ceasefire agreement, the Houthis have agreed to stop targeting shipping in the Red Sea. This is a significant announcement, and the president, of course, deserves credit for this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Look, the Houthis, I believe it was December, they kind of issued their own moratorium, so to speak, on bombing, but the Biden administration had also been bombing. So this was a continuation. Donald Trump's administration comes in March, and they resume this bombing campaign because we needed to get to the point where the Houthis are outright saying, at least according to Donald Trump, we're not interested in this anymore. That being said, there's talks that Israel was not made aware of these discussions between the Houthis and the United States. And I like Donald Trump's response. Basically, he said, look, they're not going to go after the United States. Things are good between us. That's all I care about. That's the type of president that Americans elected in November. America first. We only care about what's going on with us unless, something dramatic happens.
Absolutely. And that is what we are seeing with President Trump in power, America first. And even though Joe Biden thinks that Donald Trump has achieved nothing triumphant, there's been so many achievements, such as closing the border and following through with his deportation promise. The Trump administration has deported more than 150,000 people since Trump took office on January 20, delivering on a key election promise. And the administration has also encouraged illegal immigrants to leave voluntarily. We know that many on the left, people, they want to see people who've come to America illegally stay in the country. So much so, they're making a song and dance about it and protesting. This is the latest video of lefties singing in protest outside Delaney Hall Detention Centre in New Jersey. Some are even holding up stop signs demanding that deportations stop. Brianna, I have to get your reaction to that video, but this is what the Democrats want. Some of them, of course, not all, but they'd rather see people who entered the country illegally stay.
Yeah, I'm curious to know how many illegal migrants each of those individuals singing actually are housing in their homes, right? Because at the end of the day, most people say they want XYZ, but they live cushy lives. It was the same when we had seen, 50 migrants bus to Martha's Vineyard, which is this very rich enclave. And within 48 hours, all the migrants were gone because it turns out rich Democrats who say they don't care about, or, we love immigrants, all that stuff, don't actually want illegal migrants in their community. And what's really concerning is the song, the message they were saying, let my people stay. Your people are the American people. Your people are not foreigners who come into this country. Some are on the terrorist watch list. Some come and murder young women running, right? They're not your people. Your people are the American people, and you should care about their safety and your sovereignty.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brianna, anti-Israel activists have once again taken over elite universities. A group of masked anti-Israel protesters stormed Columbia University's Butler Library today, with reports of at least 2 people being injured and around 80 people were taken into custody, according to reports from the New York Post. But let's just take a look at what unfolded. Despite the threat of funding being pulled, this elite university is just failing to stamp out anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious what will happen next, because I think part of their agreement with the Trump administration to keep federal funding included not allowing people to wear masks on campus. And we clearly see that there are individuals who have their face covered. So I'm curious whether that deal is in place right now and whether there will be severe repercussions. I also think this is indicative of the leadership at Columbia not taking seriously the Trump administration. So revoking their funding and federal funds should be an immediate tomorrow action, just to let them know that the Trump administration is serious, whether Columbia is or is not.
Brianna Lyman, elections correspondent at The Federalist, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
India and Pakistan are on the brink of a wider conflict 2 weeks after a massacre on tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir, which killed 26 people. India has launched strikes on Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Now, India says it targeted terrorist infrastructure, and Pakistan claims 31 people have been killed, and Pakistan's Prime Minister has vowed to respond. Joining us is Professor Greg Barton, Deakin University Global Islamic Politics Chair. Professor Greg Barton, thank you for your time. Look, there's been conflict over Kashmir between India and Pakistan for a long time, but this appears to be a significant escalation in tensions between the two nuclear-armed countries. Can I get your reaction to the developments?
Yeah, it is very worrying, Gabriella. There have been 3 wars fought between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. I mean, both countries occupy parts of Kashmir. China occupies a northern section. Of course, India and Pakistan separated in 78, and that separation was never cleanly worked out in Kashmir. The last war fought in Kashmir was 1999, and over 1,000 people were killed. So that's fairly recent, and it shows how quickly things can escalate. Both sides are clearly not wanting to escalate, but of course, escalation often happens just because events get carried away and no one side controls what happens next.
Can you talk to us about why there's been so much unrest in Kashmir and the role that religion plays in this?
Yeah, Kashmir is divided between Hindu and Muslim population. Many of the Muslims live in the Pakistan-controlled Kashmir, but many Muslims live also in India-controlled Kashmir. And the federal government in New Delhi has imposed a kind of rule over Kashmir, which is not typical of most states, which is resented by Muslims living in Kashmir. They feel that they're sort of second-class citizens. There has been simmering tensions for a long time, but recently there was a terrible terrorist attack when gunmen opened fire on Hindu Indians who were Mountain Meadow, at least 25 people killed. They were deliberately targeted for being Hindus. India says that 2 of the gunmen were Pakistanis, suggesting they were linked to the Pakistani group Lashkar-e-Toiba or Lashkar-e-Muhammad, groups that have been linked to the Pakistani military. So, that's a really, none of these allegations are not proven, but that suggests that there's a lot of resentment, not just the fact that a terrorist group has done something, but possibly there's been state involvement or support or at least negligence in some way.
And now we've seen India respond with strikes, and Pakistan's Prime Minister has vowed to respond to the latest attacks. What are Pakistan's options?
Well, I think the first thing to understand is that India launched strikes that targeted civilian areas, but it says with some plausibility that these civilian areas where groups like Lashkar-e-Muhammad and Lashkar-e-Toiba had bases. The strikes were limited. I mean, terrible death toll, but still limited strikes. At the same time that Pakistan and India engaged in aerial combat, each 125 aircraft were literally involved. The aircraft for both countries stayed either side of their border. They didn't cross the border, so they fired missiles at each other from a long range. Pakistan says that 3 of the sophisticated French-made Rafale jets were shot down and 2 other aircraft and a drone. Now, this is an important detail, apart from what it means in terms of understanding the military power of these nations and this equipment, because it means that Pakistan has an off-ramp. It can plausibly claim we've inflicted major damage on the Indians. They could launch a limited strike, perhaps, and there's reports of rocket strikes in Indian air bases, and then both sides could declare victory. That sounds like wishful thinking, but it's a very plausible way of de-escalating, because if Pakistan goes beyond this and says, no, we have to strike back harder, which is what the political rhetoric at the moment is saying, the danger is that they lose control of what happens next.
And that is the danger, that, there is so much concern that both sides are nuclear armed countries. What's your sense of how this will play out?
I think it's reasonable to hope that they're going to de-escalate, because both sides have a very strong reason to want to do that. And both sides can plausibly claim that they've, a sort of victory where they've established a response. It's embarrassing for India to have lost these aircraft, if this is confirmed, but at least leaves Pakistan with an off-ramp. But, Gabriella, we're not living in ordinary times. We don't have the normal assurance that America will step in and use back-channel diplomacy through both countries that it has friendly relations with to de-escalate. That level of confidence is not there at the moment. We've got this terrible war between Russia and Ukraine, where Pakistan and India have taken different sides. There's a real sense of uncertainty in global affairs at the moment. So, had this occurred several years ago, we'd be very concerned. It's even more concerning that it's happening now in May of 2025, when the world is in such disarray.
Well, the US President, Donald Trump, has spoken about the conflict. Let's just take a listen to what he had to say.
India and Pakistan, what's your position?
Oh, it's so terrible. My position is I get along with both. I know both very well, and I want to see them work it out. I want to see them stop. And hopefully they can stop now. They've gone tit for tat, so hopefully they can stop now. But I know both. We get along with both the countries very well, good relationships with both, and I want to see it stop. And if I can do anything to help, I will be there.
US officials say that they've been in touch with both sides and they're urging the countries to work towards a responsible resolution. I suppose, are you surprised to see the US take more of a hands-off approach here?
Yeah, it's very disturbing, Gabriella. I mean, what President Trump said, of course, is good sentiment, but, the president gets a daily presidential brief. He'd said before that, those comments, that he just, heard this news coming into the Oval. It doesn't suggest a president in the mold of Ronald Reagan or George Bush fully in charge. Having said that, the response from the US administration officials, Pentagon officials, suggests that more work's been done behind the scenes, as you would expect. But this echoes this point that we are in uncertain times. That normal confidence we have in America making the right choices isn't there at the moment.
You say we're in uncertain times. Is it likely that other terrorist groups could see this as an opportune time to strike?
Absolutely. We've got a terrible situation in Afghanistan where Al-Qaeda and Islamic State both have very strong presence. The troubles in Pakistan, which this could escalate, lead to a porous border. Of course, we've got the tragedy of the Middle East, Islamic State surging across eastern North Africa. There's lots of reasons for somebody to feel that now is the time, if they're drawn to these extremist groups, are involved in their networks, to feel that now's the time to launch a strike. This is a moment of opportunity.
And I just have to ask, I suppose you are confident, though, that we are going to see tensions de-escalate?
No, I'm not confident. I'm hopeful, and I lean towards being more optimistic than not. But we could see a regional war, as we saw at least a very limited war, as in 1999, still 1,000 lives lost. But we could see something spiral downwards from that and become very much worse very quickly.
Professor Greg Barton, Deakin University Global Islamic Politics Chair, really appreciate you making the time to speak to us here on Power Hour. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Joining us now is News Corp journalist Louise Roberts. Louise, great to see you. Thank you for joining us. The BBC has admitted to a lapse in standards over its coverage of Prince Harry's interview on security arrangements. Now, the broadcaster issued a statement after airing the half-hour interview with the Duke of Sussex, which was filmed in Montecito just hours after he lost his appeal over UK police protection. So the BBC admitted to a lapse in standards, but what exactly did they have to say?
Well, this is extraordinary because the BBC and Radio 4 are sort of the paragons of virtue and fact in the UK. And the fact that also that Harry chose to do an interview with the taxpayer-funded BBC, complaining about the fact that his taxpayer-funded security would no longer be existing. It just beggars belief, but it sort of speaks to the hypocrisy around Harry as well. So the fact that they allowed him, it was meant to be 10 minutes, I think, the TV interview originally, but the fact they allowed him 30 minutes just to ramble on with no evidence about how it was an establishment stitch up, the reason that he was denied this extra taxpayer-funded protection. And of course, the palace actually issued a statement saying that, well, alluding to the fact that this wasn't true, but sort of pointing to the fact that this decision had been discussed previously and we always came to the same result, which is, as a non-working royal, Harry is not entitled to taxpayer-funded security. It doesn't mean, Gabriella, that when he goes to the UK that he has no security. Of course he does. He just has to pay for it himself.
Yes.
So the fact that he allowed this narrative to fester and then the BBC allowed it to fester, they had to basically fall on their sword and say, oh, we've had a lapse in editorial standard. We should actually called him out. And we shouldn't have had an expert on Radio 4 the next day saying that, yes, it was an establishment stitch-up and supporting Harry's unsubstantiated view. And bear in mind, of course, that Harry technically was part of the establishment. He expected his father to step into the King's own legal system and parliamentary system and do something about it. It was just like... Yeah, it just beggars belief what Harry does the next step, and he wonders why, when he says in the same interview, I want to reconcile with my family, they want nothing to do with it.
Absolutely, and it's so hard to swallow, isn't it? You're watching him, he's been whining and whining for years, and I think he loses sympathy every day. And there are now reports that Prince Harry is being blackballed by the royal family because none of them trust him or Meghan Markle. Sources in Page 6 say, I genuinely think that nobody trusts him, and that's the bottom line. The royal family has major trust issues with him, and that's what's at the heart of everything. You know, Louise, is that your sense? What do you make of these reports?
I agree. I think Sarah's piece in the New York Post, Sarah Nathan's piece, was fascinating because it not only shows that the situation between these warring family continues, it's moved beyond forgiveness. Everyone thought it was about forgiveness. The hateful things he said in his autobiography and the terrible things they said in the Oprah interview, it's now a matter of honesty and security. They cannot tell him anything. And that points to the fact that when he said that, you know, he's worried about his father and wants to reconcile, and I don't know how much time my father has left. He has no idea. He has no information. They tell him nothing because whatever is said ends up in the media.
Absolutely. And then, you know, he might want to get another book deal going or whatever's coming next.
Yes.
He might have
all those little
new
tidbits,
material to work with. Now, Meghan Markle has shared a new photo of Prince Archie enjoying a sunset to mark his 6th birthday. In an Instagram post, she wrote, "Thank you for all the love, prayers and warm wishes. He's 6. Where did the time go?" Now, of course, she loves using social media to get her message out and to stay in the headlines. But I have to agree, I can't believe he's 6.
Yeah, he's grown up very fast. And look, I have to commend Harry and Meghan for one thing, which is the way they do protect the privacy of their children.
Right.
You can see his back is turned to the camera. He's looking at a sunset. He's sort of present, but there's no sort of breach of his identity. But you're absolutely right. This is all part of Meghan's sort of brand building narrative and storytelling thing that she's absolutely obsessed with on social media. And I mean, you know, when the kids are older, whether they want to actually be part of that, it sort of remains to be seen. She talks about keeping a digital scrapbook. But what a contrast between that. He looks like he's almost standing on a balcony in that shot where he's sort of gazing at the Californian sunset. And what a contrast between that and when you saw his cousins, who of course he doesn't see or speak to or interact with at all, we believe, on the balcony for the VE flyover as well, where they're sort of there and joking and it's all very front and centre. And of course, you know, Lilibet and Archie aren't working royals, so they're not photographed at school, they're not photographed at Trooping the Colour and things like that, which is fair enough that their identity should be protected, but it also makes you feel sad because it's another nail in the coffin for their relationship with their own little cousins who they don't know.
And that's no fault of theirs. It's Harry and Meghan.
Yeah.
Well, King Charles and Queen Camilla have marked the 2nd anniversary of their coronation by unveiling their new state portraits. Now, the portrait of the King shows him wearing the robe of state alongside his naval uniform with medals, and the Queen is portrayed wearing her coronation dress. Now, the paintings will be displayed in the National Gallery Central Hall until June, and then they'll be moving to their permanent home in the throne room at Buckingham Palace. Is that right?
That's right. Yes, they will. They're on display until June 5. So I found these portraits fascinating because they are sort of speaking to the reign of Charles as well. His mother's portraits were always very official with lots of crowns and jewels and stuff. You see, his portrait is it's dignified. It shows the man behind the monarch, I feel. You kind of see a bit of a wistful, thoughtful look in his eyes. And I think that's the man Charles is. He's sort of projecting forward to, obviously, when William takes the throne as well. It's a new path that he's charting there. And I think it was interesting that Camilla's dress was so elegant and beautiful, but it wasn't sort of fussy or there wasn't a crown or lots of jewels and stuff. And the fact that her daughter Laura was there as well and approved it sort of, I think, speaks volumes as well. But it was a great picture of Camilla because, let's face it, she has some real style and grit, that her ascension to the throne has been a lot of hard work over many years. And I think that is really illustrated by this sort of very elegant portrait, which apparently they both love. So well done to them.
Well said. Louise Roberts, News Corp journalist, thank you so much for joining us. A former friend from Prince Harry's old life has slammed the Duke of Sussex's latest TV interview as unforgivable. Riley Sullivan is a lifestyle reporter here at skynews.com.au and he's always across the latest celebrity headlines. Riley, great to see you.
Great to be back.
So Prince Harry's former friend Ben Goldsmith has spoken out following Harry's recent interview with the BBC. What did he have to say?
Yes, so Ben Goldsmith is someone really from Harry's old life. His sister Jemima Goldsmith was a very, very close friend of Princess Diana, possibly one of her closest friends. So this is really his personal life, obviously, you know, in the past. So Ben's come out, he spoke out following the BBC interview that Harry did last week, talking about, as usual, the royal family, talking about the monarchy. We know they don't like that. Harry spoke about King Charles again. We know that the monarchy doesn't like that. And Ben, you know, spoke out. You know, he has never really publicly commented on the Duke of Sussex before. I think a lot of people from Harry's old life have felt torn. I think that they've been outraged with some of the behaviour. Harry hinted at that in his book, but they haven't really, I guess, verbalised it. And now they have. You know, Ben said that it was unforgivable. Basically, that's what Harry's behaviour is. So quite damning and sad, because the interview that Harry did was sad, and I don't think it's going to change anything.
Absolutely not. And I think it's, I'm sure Ben is not alone in believing that it's unforgivable.
No.
The family of Prince Andrew's accuser, Virginia Giuffre, have launched a GoFundMe to build a memorial in her memory. So Virginia reportedly left a multi-million-dollar estate. Why have the family chosen to launch the fundraiser? Yes, so the family of Virginia Giuffre have launched this fundraiser. It is essentially to leave a mark, they think, a physical mark of her legacy as an activist, as an advocate, as a survivor of abuse and trafficking. And of course there were questions, because we know that Virginia Giuffre has received millions of dollars in her lifetime through settlements. There was so there's questions being asked, well, hang on, does she not, is what's happened to this money that was in her estate? And essentially that money is still there, but it will take many years of complicated, I guess, legal processes before that money is available. I think because she passed away without a will, and she was living in Australia, she was an American citizen, it's very complicated. So her family might not receive any of that money that she received from Prince Andrew in a settlement. It could be years that they could be waiting. Okay. All eyes were on Buckingham Palace's famed balcony as the royal family gathered to mark VE Day, but the group looked even smaller than usual. Who was missing from the lineup, and is this a sign for the future? Yeah, well, it feels like that. It feels like it's the ever-shrinking Buckingham Palace balcony, because I think a lot of people, still remember during Queen Elizabeth's time, the balcony was a huge thing. It would have 30 people on there. She'd get all of the cousins, all of the relatives would be there. And since King Charles has taken the throne, he really has slimmed it down. He basically cut it back to core working royals. So that was only about a dozen people. But on VE Day, it was even smaller than usual. We didn't have the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, who were working royals. They weren't there. Some people thought, well, is Prince Andrew going to show up? Of course not, but he wasn't there. And the other sort of noticeable absence, I guess, would be the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh's children were not there. We know that Louise Windsor is away in Scotland at university. It's unclear if they just decided, okay, now that they're off, they're having their own lives, they won't be on the balcony anymore, or if this was a one-off. But yeah, I have to say it was looking pretty sparse up there. There were some big gaps, especially, they kind of stage managed it a little bit. So they had the Wales family on one side, on the King's left, but that other side was looking pretty sparse. So yeah, it made for very kind of interesting viewing. Yeah, absolutely. Princess Beatrice and Eugenie have opened up about their upbringings in a rare podcast interview. What did the royals have to say, and why are some fans convinced they snubbed Meghan Markle? Yeah, well, this is quite a funny one. So Beatrice and Eugenie are good in the sense that they don't really talk about their personal lives. They don't cash in. They could. I mean, technically, there's nothing stopping Beatrice and Eugenie from doing what Meghan and Harry have done, selling books, going on TV, doing all of these things, but they've never done that. They're discreet, they live their own lives, and I think because of that, they are still in the fold with the royal family. But they did sit down for this podcast, I will say, and it was actually with one of Harry's ex-girlfriends, so that's the first sort of dig at Meghan. But the major dig would be, well, hang on, Meghan's got a podcast. We know she's desperate for high-profile guests. We know that she's tried to get Beyonce and Taylor Swift, and they didn't want a bar of it. So presumably, she's probably sitting in Montecito thinking, hang on, why haven't you done my podcast? Imagine that. Yeah, so very interesting. But it was a great interview. They really paid tribute actually to their mother, the Duchess of York. And I think that there's probably some truth in that. I think Fergie being quite a down-to-earth person, very earthy, I think that is maybe why they are quite normal people, because if you think about it, growing up in the royal family is extraordinary circumstances, but I do think that Fergie was really the one that has kind of guided them and given them a bit of normalcy. So yeah, it was very interesting to listen to. Riley Sullivan, so good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks. And that is Power Hour. Thank you for your company. We'll see you next week. Make sure you subscribe to Sky News Australia on YouTube.